Welcome to, I think, number 4 of Attached, a Different Lens. And the reason we do this is because I have so many conversations with Kirsty. We have a very similar parenting journey, and somehow we've had an opposite journey together. So I laughed today. Oh, I did laugh the other day when I gave the question to Kirsty because I knew I was giving her an infinite question. And the question was, how do children learn?
Yeah, I mean, it is so huge, and it was kind of funny to watch my initial response because it was kind of like the left brain was like making a checklist of all the ways, and then and then part of me was thinking like, actually, what's the big picture, and even that really kind of huge philosophical question of what is learning, which is fascinating in itself, really. It's like, how do any of us learn? And the way I see it, there's kind of multiple pieces, and that's, kind of what it is to be human. It's all these things coming together. So we've got the brain, and it does its like stepwise learning of new things. But when we're born, a lot of it is instinctive, all the initial things, learning to breastfeed, crawl, all of those things are very, very much instinctive. And then it's like, and where does the instinct come from? And as we get older, of course, maybe we're more aware of these kind of facets of things where it's like, I want to learn something. I'm going to learn the steps. But then we also have these kind of creative or intuitive impulses and the times where it feels like we're in the flow and we actually more just download something and it flows through. But then we have to scaffold it with the thinking brain. So yeah, super, super fascinating question. And so coming back to how do children learn? It's, the big picture is kind of like, do we come into this world with a plan, things we want to learn? Um, However you look at that, like it's a life plan or karma or it doesn't matter. And then we come in and we're in this kind of soup. And so how do we learn things? There's the automatic things, but do the automatic things occur if we're not supported? Or, they don't. There's those kids the odd child who's been completely without human contact or in the wild and they don't learn like the rest of us. And so the child has impulses and desires and the relationships provide the scaffold, the safe place so that the child can start to explore and get feedback and know that they're safe to do that. And there's all varying different degrees of that. It's not like everything has to be perfect um, for a child to learn. And what are they learning? They're learning things, they're learning about the world, but they're also learning, like, who am I? What does it mean to be alive? Who am I in relationship to other people? And it's interesting for me because I've chosen to go down a kind of natural learning or unschooling type path with my children. So, this philosophy is kind of at play. There's a lot of like, you can be free to explore, but if you were, completely shut down, the freedom wouldn't matter. And you wouldn't take things on and you wouldn't be able to follow your passions. And I find it's a constant balance as well between providing enough freedom, enough stimulation, and noticing, however they're asking, it might not be clear, noticing when a child needs, my children in my case, but it could be any child, noticing when they need support. And they may not necessarily say, "Hey, mum, I'm really struggling with XYZ. Can you help me?" Actually, they might just avoid that thing.
I
So
think we're going to
it's
have very similar answers. So
so
just
it's
want to
not,
reassure
yeah,
you.
yeah, it's so funny. It's not completely like just let them do their thing, and as long as they know you, I love them, and they're fed and they're clean. It's very much like this to and fro of noticing, and obviously this is relevant in all of life, not just if you are homeschooling your children. Like that's very clear. There's many ways to be noticing what goes on. And we've even spoken, I'm not sure if we recorded it previous weeks, about even just noticing those developmental things, like, hmm, is my child responding to my voice? Are they crawling? Have they um, experienced a stress so that they haven't integrated this reflex? And it doesn't have to be a major stress. It's not like you've failed as a parent if your child misses a developmental milestone. It's all just noticing, responding, and a lot of the time, some of these things, if there's a gap, it can be filled in intuitively if you're just responding. But it's also absolutely fine to use your left brain, your rationale, the resources that are available, and to say, actually, I think, you know, my child would benefit from climbing some ladders because they need some cross lateralization or whatever. Like it's all part of it. And the key piece is always, am I present? Is someone present enough with these children that it's going to be noticed what's going on with them? They've got someone to bounce off, and there's no time limit on, when things need to be learned. Like I've seen that in my kids, they're not following a traditional timeline.
So
But I'm
what
still
made
I'm still noticing like,
so
yeah,
I've got
I'm
a
still
question.
noticing.
What made you decide that homeschooling and then unschooling was your route? I think that's always
Mm,
interesting for people because you are the guide for your children, so you've sort of put in that framework. What was it that you
yeah,
were just noticing?
that's right. Like if they'd had the choice, they might have been like, I want to go to school. They don't say that now, but maybe that's conditioning. So when even before my kids were born, I was, you know, kind of like, how am I, like, what's my philosophy? How do I want to do this? And one of the things that I decided I felt was important was this idea of maintaining intrinsic motivation as well as maintaining safety. And I suppose I had the intuitive or even logical sense that my children might be quite sensitive because I'm quite sensitive. And so I was like, yeah, I feel really strongly that I would like, if possible, for them to be able to not be overly manipulated or constrained so that what matters to them can come into the light. So that was a really big piece of it. And, I was kind of following this attachment parenting philosophy, and we did a little bit of play center. Even that, I was a bit like um, outside the norm within that within that group, which is fine. I made some great friends there as well. And I just thought about, wow, that's quite a contrast to go from the way we're living now to a school system. And it doesn't mean that it can't work beautifully. But for me, I was like, I don't think so. And I even took my oldest boy to a like an interview and signed did all the paperwork for the local Steiner school. as the kind of like, oh, that could be a more holistic option. And then we went for this interview, and they basically accepted us, like, yay, you won the interview. And then afterwards, I said to my husband, I was like, I don't think it's for him. And he was kind of like, what? Like we went through all this, like, if we're not doing this, what are we doing? And I was like, it just doesn't feel right. Um, so it was that thing of, yeah, what feels aligned for this child, for this family, and it's going to look probably really different for everyone. Mm.
I love that. I've written a whole lot of notes as you were, and I apologize because I know that that was a tricky question. So
But
it's
so fun. So what's your response?
well, I'm going to start off as the mum that I was, and the mum that I was didn't realize she was carrying wounds, and the mum that I was felt that I had to teach my children. Now, what's happened is I've gone on this beautiful journey with Pikler, and I've got 180 degrees different. So the very first things I put on my list was safety and connection. And that's what I was hearing you say, because there was a quote that I heard, and it's absolutely true. The emotionally topped up child will play deeply, and they can do nothing else. And that's by Emmy Pikler. And it's about us getting out the way. I didn't get out the way of my children. It was more, I was carrying so many wounds that, and my nervous system was so activated that I was directing the orchestra in a way that didn't need to be directed, because it's exactly what you were saying as well, the freedom and the noticing, because the child does have this innate way of unfolding, and only they know the inside of their body, and they know the temperament that they've come into this world with. They know, this is what we say authenticity is. And I think I loved that. There was a quote by Maria Montessori, and I've never been able to find it again. So maybe someone who's listening to this could give it, but it was something like, our role is to support the child to be the best version of themselves, because they already come in knowing who they are, and our role is to support them to be the best version. Saw this quote once, never seen it again, driven me nuts. But again, this intrinsic and this extrinsic motivation, I think, is huge. Because if we have the lens that we might not be able to see internally what's going on for the child, but they're still learning, then we can trust this intrinsic learning. And there's times where there's an extrinsic as well, because again, I loved what you said about the freedom and the noticing, because this is also where people get Pikler wrong, because they think it's freedom of movement and freedom of play at no stopping point. But what they did was they followed children, and they saw the range, and there's a huge range we don't actually talk about, a huge range. And there's a part where the majority will actually meet things at certain times, but then there's outside things as well. And so they will always bring in someone extra when they see that the child has gone out of those limits, because it's not about pure trusting, because sometimes the children do get stuck. There might be that they've got a retained reflex, or again, I literally look back at my own child. I was talking to a friend in the UK last night, and we both experienced trauma at the start of our lives. And I was saying that my sister is gifted and I struggled. Well, that's actually not the truth. I'm just as gifted as my sister, apart from I was caught in trauma and no one noticed. I couldn't think. I couldn't learn to read well. I couldn't learn to write well, because my body was shut down. And now, as a 50-year-old woman, I would say, whoa, I have ideas like no one else has ideas. I am incredibly creative and intelligent, because I've actually worked on the wounds that were limiting my body. And so there's a part for children, it's more allow them to, because some of the children, so some children will literally race through all their motor stuff really quickly, but they might be the sports people in the world. They might have a faster rhythm. That's their authenticity. And then I've watched children that have taken longer, but when I watch their hands are so intricate. They spend so much time literally watching how things move. They potentially are our dressmakers, our designers, it's something with your hands. And then when you watch other children, they're experimenting all the time. There are scientists. And if we actually get out of the way, we can see this. And I think for me, this was my frustration working in the educational system, because I didn't want to do all this reporting. It's more, I trust children. I actually trust children. They're going to learn in the order that they need to learn. And so for some children, they learn one thing in this order, then they come back to something else. And I've watched this, and there's no panic. But where I was as a mum was I was panicking. They're not doing this. Oh my goodness, they're not doing that. They're not doing the other. And I wonder what would have happened. And you can only look back with, okay, I wonder. But I wonder if I wasn't carrying the not good enough wound, if there's something wrong with me, all the things that I felt because I was carrying trauma, if I could have got out of the way of my children, because I was so scared they were going to have the same childhood as me. And I was so scared they wouldn't be seen, they wouldn't be heard, they wouldn't be important. All the things that I was carrying. And so it's interesting, Kirsty, I did the opposite. They went into the school system. And the reason I chose the school system was because my nervous system was activating so much into the fight. I didn't think it was actually okay for my children to be home with me. And I think I knew sort of back then that I would be passing on my own wounds to them, and they needed some space for me. I desperately wanted to homeschool, but I didn't think I was able to homeschool them. Nothing wrong with them, that it was me. And I probably would have gone down the same route of wanting to unschool, but my wounds would have kept getting in the way if their reading had been taking longer to take off, or if there was something that I was comparing them to another child I was seeing in the homeschool. All of my wounds would have activated. It was me. I was in the way. So I suppose that's, and I love your bit, because as I was writing notes, I'm like, we're talking the same thing, but from a different angle. And for me, my decisions, or what happened for me, was because of how my nervous system activates or activated, and all the wounds that I was carrying. And I was lucky enough to be introduced to Pikler when my children were, gosh, I think they were 7 and 10 when I was able to been introduced to it. So by that point, I'd missed the first part. But then I was watching, and I was placed in an infant room, and it terrified me. It terrified me being in an infant room. And I think that's because I had nothing. I survived parenthood, but I had nothing. And again, I was a really, really good kindy teacher, because I was that all singing, all dancing. I was really good at entertaining people. And then I was put into this really quiet space, and I had to work on myself, because I stood out like a sore thumb in this space. And then I got to see the magic when the adults get out of the way. And so again, last week I was talking about, how intelligent toddlers are, how intelligent when you put a boundary in, and the ingenious way, and that's learning, the ingenious ways of them coming. And again, I love the children that test boundaries from every single direction, because I can see how creative they are. And they're doing it for their own safety, but I'm like, cool, all right, game on. Because, I'm going to hold this boundary, and I'm going to hold it calmly, and I'm not going to get activated. But I know for your safety, you're going to test it from and I know that you're learning to see that what I say is true, because for so many children, it's more, what I say is that what you really mean? Because I'm going to test it, and I'm going to test you, and I'm going to test dad at the same time, or to see
Yeah, that's
whether
a good
are
one,
you
eh?
actually talking to each other? Have you got have you got different ideas? Because if you've got different ideas, I'm going to show you that you've got different ideas. And you will blame me, but actually you need to look at yourselves because you two aren't talking. So
Yeah, it's
that's
so
me, because
fascinating.
I love this work.
Yeah. Yes, it's such that's so incredible to watch children and because you've watched such a range of children and all the different ways they are. Yeah, so magical when we can just observe them. And just to be clear, it's not like I was parenting from a place of no wounds.
And I know
And
it's just different. It's just different.
it's just different. And part of that for me was like I was actually scared to have other people screw up my kids. So it's just the mirror of being scared of screwing up your own kids.
So my husband had to go
And
in
yeah, we
because we
can't
had.
get it perfect. Yeah.
So this is really interesting as well, Kirsty, because one of the things actually going through the school system was, I know my children are coping when their eyes are alive. So it's that Rumi poem
Mm,
of the, is it the eyes show the heart or something? And what's the, but there's a
I
Rumi
don't
poem where you can see
remember.
the heart through the eyes. And I could always see that
Mm,
with my children. Even before I knew any
yeah.
of this, I knew when their eyes were dull or when their eyes were bright. And so there was times where we had to step in and say, and again, I remember, and actually this is a really, really good one, because my son got placed in a classroom, and I could see his eyes were getting duller and duller and duller. And I'm like,
Mm,
and so I went in, and I went to see the principal, and I was like, actually, I need my child moved from this class. And I said I'd like him to move into this class. And it was really interesting because it was the shouty teachers class. And it was and I'm like, my children are going to be okay because they're used to me. They're going to be actually okay. And the principal said, I'll be the judge of that. I'll actually choose which class. Mrs. Stitchbury, get back into place. This is my school. I'm like, okay. But she did put him into that teacher's class, and that teacher was amazing, absolutely amazing. And oops, we have 5 minutes.
hmm
That teacher was amazing because actually she was given all the children that were so again, sometimes it's actually looking at what's the load we're putting on certain teachers, because this teacher could cope with so much because she was that good. She was that good. And so she had the really excelling children, but she also had the children that were really all in the same class together.
Mm.
But the amazing thing was that the principal came back to me 3 weeks later, and she said, Mrs. Stitchbury, you were right. And I'm like, okay.
You weren't
She's like,
expecting that
I
admission.
was, but
Yeah.
this was the relationship I had with this principal. And she was like, your son has gone up 3 years in reading levels, in maths levels, in 3 weeks. And I said, I know, because I knew that he was being shown stuff that he already knew how to do. The teacher wasn't assessing him properly. And I knew that he was getting duller and duller and more, he was getting more, I think, doubting his own ability. And that's when I stepped in. I stepped in when he started doubting his ability. And so again, what you said about the freedom and the noticing, and I noticed, and I kept watching. I actually went in and did parent help in that class to see what was going on in that class. And I was like, no, actually, my son needs something else. And it was a huge thing for me to go and challenge the school. Huge for me to
Yeah. Being the
challenge.
difficult one. You're being difficult.
Yeah. and,
Yeah.
and but I think there was a point where that was where I advocated for my child. But I
Mm.
trusted the school until I could see something. And this is what I say to parents all the time: you know your child best. You know your child best, and trust that you know your child best, and also be aware of your wounds as well, because there were some things that I was so activated. And again, back now, when I look at things, I there was times where I didn't understand about wound work or nervous system, but I sent my husband in to have conversations. I stayed away because I knew I would activate everyone. And
Yeah.
so I knew my own limits. I knew my own limits, that I would activate everyone in the room because of my wounds. where my husband is just very laid back and he goes in and he listens to everyone and he creates calmness everywhere. And so for those difficult situations, he went and talked about those things. But then when things needed some movement, I went in and talked to about things. And we sort of understood our different superpowers as parents as we were navigating this journey. So
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Just recognizing, know thyself basically and work with it and be a team. But yeah.
and I want
And
to say
you
I
know,
was
the undercurrent of all of this is like, you know, as well, almost doesn't need to be said, is that children learn through our energy. It's not just the things we're saying and doing and the, you know, scripts about this or giving the space. It's very much that interaction all the time. And
and
that comes into that trust, that knowing, like you didn't need a concept or a structure to see the sparkle dimming in your child's eyes.
and also my children used to see my activations because it would be they would literally say to me, Mum, don't go and talk to the school. No, as they got older, they're like, don't go and talk to the school, Mum. But I think they were reading my energy, and it
Mm,
was more, yeah. There was sometimes where I could really feel my own wounds of not being included, being rejected, not mattering, not being seen, and I'm a very, very different person now, very different. But when I look back, I'm like, oh gosh, my wounds led the way a lot of the time.
mm, yeah. And it's okay. It's like, you know, we learn as we go. It's
Yeah, and I think it's more, I've done this journey because I can literally point the finger at myself and say it's actually okay. It's okay. It's more, I had trauma from childhood. Gosh, it's amazing that I've done all this with my life. It's amazing. So I think it's looking at, you do find the pathways through. They are different ways up the mountain. You'll know where you, and like I say, in the latter years, I've been coming to you for body work. And again, and I feel that, and again, it was interesting. I was talking to my friend last night, and she was saying that she had a huge thematic release about something that happened when she was, I think, just before she was 7. And she was like, her whole body changed with this relief. And I'm like, I've not done that, but that's what she was called to do. And she said
mm,
suddenly she could stand up straight. Suddenly her whole body was free because this was caught in her body and this was her path. And we were talking last night, very similar to how I talked to you, Kirsty, is that we've actually had our own journeys, and she's gone off and done totally different things to what I've done, but we
mm.
always seem to be around about the same level every time that we talk to each other. So, and I think that, yeah, it's trusting your journey and trusting your child's journey, I think is the, and I think all of that is learning. It's more, I think we all tend to think that this learning is head stuff, but it's life.
It's
Learning is life.
everything. Yes, and it's ongoing all the time. So you don't have to worry that you've missed the boat because it's like now and now and now and
So
now.
I am going
Yeah.
to stop this because it's more. I have a
Now.
time limit today,
That's
so
right. And now you have to go. So
so I'm going to say goodbye. And I love that, and I look forward to your
yeah.
question next week.
Yeah, me too. Sending
See
love.
you. Mwah.